Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining JINSA on this somber occasion, marking the 6 months since the October 7th savage attack by Hamas on Israel and the conflict that started shortly thereafter. I'm delighted to be joined by a group of JINSA's foremost Israeli and U.S. experts to discuss both what we've seen and learned over the last 6 months and what is still coming. But before we go ahead and do that, I wanted to play two greetings that we received from members of Congress to mark this occasion. We have video messages from Senator Joni Ernst and Congresswoman Claudia Tenney. So let's see those now.
Hello, everyone. This is Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa. It has been 6 months since the horrific attacks on Israel by Hamas. October 7th will forever be seared in our minds. Countless individuals taken hostage by Hamas, innocent men, women, children, and elderly. We must remember, and we must get them back. This war must end with victory to Israel. Remember October 7th.
Hi, this is Congresswoman Claudia Tenney. As we mark the 6-month anniversary of the horrific events of October 7th, we remember the 1,200 innocent Israelis slaughtered at the hands of Iran-backed Hamas terrorists, those kidnapped and still held hostage in Gaza, and thousands more traumatized, raped, and brutalized in their own homes. Now more than ever, it is vital that we reaffirm our support for Israel, our most important ally in the fight against terrorism in the Middle East. The rise of violent pro-Hamas and anti-Semitic sentiments is deeply troubling, as well as the new information that U.S.-funded organizations like the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, known as UNRWA, actually assisted in the execution of the horrific October 7th massacre. The United States-Israel Strategic Partnership has helped Israel to defend itself and the Western world from radical Islamic terrorism. The U.S. cannot afford to abandon our greatest ally and only democratic nation in the region. We must continue providing Israel with the support it needs to defend itself, free the hostages, and achieve justice for the victims of radical Palestinian terrorism. I will always stand with Israel. God bless Israel and its great partnership with the United States of America.
So many thanks to Senator Ernst and Congresswoman Tenney for those strong messages of support. With that, allow me to turn to our panel to talk about both where we've been over the last 6 months and what's still coming up. I'm honored to be joined from Israel by JINSA's Julian and Jenny Josephson, Senior Vice President for Israeli Affairs, Major General Yaakov Aish, former Director of Operations for the IDF, Distinguished Fellow Major General Yaakov Amidror, former National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister, and Distinguished Fellow Major General Amikon Norkin, former Commander of the Israeli Air Forces. And from here in DC, the Randy and Charles Wax Senior Fellow at JINSA, John Hanna. Thank you all for being with us. Maybe I can start with the acknowledgement that hindsight is 2020, but to get you to think back to October 7th and the days immediately after, and ask you quickly, did you then expect that after 6 months, this is where we would be at with the war still ongoing in Gaza, with some 133 hostages still being held by Hamas, with tens of thousands of Israelis still evacuated from their homes in the south, and tens of thousands more evacuated in the north? Did we know that this would take this long? General Amador, let me start with you.
Thank you very much. I didn't think about the duration of the war because I didn't know what war it will be. I didn't know if the Hezbollah will intervene, and intervention of Hezbollah can make the difference. We didn't take into account the fact that we have to go parallel under the wall, under the ground and on the ground, and to fight parallel in both. I didn't think about the influence of the hostages on the war itself and how it will slow the IDF and prevent it from going to some areas because of the intelligence that the hostages might be there. And I didn't understand the character of the new war. Yesterday I spoke with an American expert, and he said that this war will be learned in schools in the future because it's the first time that an army had to fight both under the ground and on the ground, and the casualties is is surprisingly low. And he said that the American expert before the war thought that a division going into Gaza will have at least 1,000 casualties. And remember that the IDF lost in the whole process of taking, 75% of Gaza, 260 soldiers, that's all. Each of them is a tragedy, but the number is... So it's a totally different war than I expected. Where the IDF decided to go, the achievements are very clear. Not even once he was stopped by Hamas for a while. But we have still to fulfill the mission in Rafah and another corner of the central two refugee camps. But I think that the results up till now, from the military point of view, are very high. The problem of Israel is not in the battlefield. The problem of Israel that Israel is losing support around the world because after 6 months, it's very complicated to make people understand why it is so long and why the Palestinians suffering for so long. The number of casualties in the Palestinian side is not a surprise. It's the number of the ratio between terrorists and civilians is 1 to 2. It's better than any American operation in the past. Yes, but it's long, and the length of the operation is making Israel many problems around the world.
Well, let me pause you there. Thank you, General Amidror. General Aish, your thoughts, has the war unfolded as you expected, or have there been surprises?
Well, I would like to join General Amidror in terms of performance. However, I would like to challenge the time frame that was used for those achievements. I'll go back to the strategic goal that was defined by the political echelon to the IDF. It was basically to dismantle Hamas from its military capabilities. And it seems to me like a significant part of it was achieved. I would say that 20 out of 24 battalions were dismantled. Infrastructure, most of it was demolished. However, when it comes to the military leadership of Hamas, it seems to me like we still have a long way to go. And when it refers to the fact that Hamas still control the humanitarian and administrative parts of Gaza, we have still a long way to go. And when I'm judging all of it in terms of 6 months, it seems to me like we have lost quite a lot of, I would say, international support and sympathy. And I think looking backwards, we could have done it faster. I'm not sure if it was so efficient as we did it so far, and avoiding casualties and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, when I'm looking at the strategic situation of Israel right now facing the near future. I'm not very pleased from that. And this is without talking about the other arenas, the other fronts that the IDF is facing and are accumulating. Hezbollah was mentioned already, the Houthis not yet, the Shia militia, the militias from the Golan Heights, and some other players. So it's a bit more complicated than just a short answer. But I think time here is a crucial factor, and I think we should have considered it in different ways.
Thank you, General Eish. General Norkin, your thoughts, maybe particularly on the air component.
Well, first of all, as Aish and Amidor described, it's a different war. And at October 7, we all understand that we cannot accept any military threat from Gaza. So the plan is to destroy the military capabilities. And I'm not sure that we knew at that time how we are going to do it, but we knew that this is the target, this is the goal. And we also knew that the war might be a different war. We didn't fought a war like that in the past. I think, as Amidor mentioned, no one did it in the Western world. So the war is different war, different scales, many phases, ceasefire, hostages, on ground, underground, many fronts. So it's a different war. And I also would like to join to my friends and to mention that the military achievement till now, I think they are quite good. To achieve those goals in 6 months, I think it's quite a positive situation from the military point of view. Unfortunately, because we did some mistake and also the parameters are some of them against us, we lost our legitimacy. And now the legitimacy become the main issue. Second, we move a lot of people, a lot of citizens from the northern border. And I'm not sure that this was the right decision for this kind of war. Because the plan was to fight, if there is a war against Hezbollah for a week, 2 or 3 weeks, we should move the citizen from the border. But for a war that we might fight for a year, I'm not sure that this is the right decision to take. Second, I think that we all estimate that the Iranian proxies are going to join to this campaign. And we see them all. The proxies from Syria, from Iraq, from Yemen, they all are part of this war now. And I'm happy that there is an American coalition that decide to engage with the Houthis. At the end of the day, the threat from the Houthis front might be completely different. And I think that the American forces, they are going to reduce the threat from Yemen. And the last is Iran. I think that now with the situation in Israel, I'm not sure that this is something that we all thought about, that we are going to, let's say, attack such a target in Damascus, and we are going to be now under a threat directly from Iran. This is something that for this specific week is different than the previous 6 months.
Thanks, General Norkin, and definitely we'll want to talk about the Iranian threat going forward. But John, let me ask you first on your reflections on the 6 months and if things have unfolded as you expected.
Well, I think on the one hand, I I really thought this would be a different kind of war, and it would be a longer war, and that I didn't think, though, that it would take this long. I've got to admit, I thought if we could get a couple of months out of an American government being able to steel itself, steel the American people for what was going to obviously be a very brutal and difficult fight, in which the pictures on the world's TV screens and social media feeds would immediately turn from the tragedy in Israel to, horrible scenes of suffering Palestinian women and children. If you had told me then that the American support for Israel to continue the fight would have lasted well into 2024, I may have bet against it on October the 8th, 9th, or 10th. So on the one hand, I'm pleasantly surprised. I certainly, in my, more than decade and a half in the U.S. government, never had any experience of an American government that was able to sustain its support for Israel in one of these conflicts as long as it has in this one. And, my seminal moment here was in 2006 with the war with Hezbollah, where I think somebody even as vigorously supportive of Israel instinctively as President Bush was only able to last about 34 days under the kinds of pressures he was facing, particularly internationally. So I give the Biden administration a lot of credit for what it's done militarily to support Israel, its efforts to deter Iran. And yet, obviously, we now it looks like we're beginning to see the limits of that. I think a lot of it has to do with the American political calendar, and that people have been able to convince the president that this war is potentially even going to cost him the election if it continues as it has for the next several months, the closer we get to the election. I think, my guess, I'm not a political expert, but that they're probably wrong about that. But I do think also, Israel, the war has taken a long time. They've had a lot of time to do the job. They're obviously going to need several months more, potentially. I do think there are things Israel could have done early on. It was pretty clear to me, and in the day after Gaza report that Jinsa was recently a part of, that the humanitarian factor was going to become a strategic element in the question of how much time and space Israel was going to have. And I just feel like our two governments never really came together on that basic understanding that Israel was resistant to that for its own reasons. And I understand there were legitimate political reasons in Israel to be resistant to that. But I think the failure to come to some kind of strategic understanding and agreement on that issue has, I think, hurt things and has undermined the relationship in ways that I think send all the wrong signals to our enemies, particularly in the Iranian axis, and in ways that I think will only prolong the war and prolong the agony of suffering Palestinians. So I'm still, deeply hopeful that we'll be able to, for instance, in the operation in Rafah, I hope we all understand still that the only way to get to a day after is to defeat Hamas. And then the question becomes, how do we together as an international community do what we need to do to try and protect those Palestinian civilians in and around Rafah as best as we can? And I just don't see the strategic work being done between our teams to get our heads together to figure out how we're going to do that. How do we get Arab support for that? How do we get the rest of the international community involved in that effort so Israel can get about the business of destroying Hamas, finishing this war off, and moving it to a different phase as soon as possible?
Thanks, John.
Blaise,
let me go with...
I would
please
like
go ahead,
just
General.
to mention, I think it's important for us and for our audience to mention the American support in the beginning of the war, especially for the Air Force, and not just the Air Force, but I think that all the plans that I know very well as a defense attaché, all the plans that we build between the American military and the Israeli military, everything work by plan. And the support, the ammunition, the vehicles, and all the systems that the American military sent to Israel, I think we should all appreciate. I know that it's not the situation now between the governments, but between the military and I think at the beginning it was a strategic support which helped Israel to achieve the goals that we already talked about a few minutes ago.
Thanks for that, General Norkin. Let me ask one more round of retrospective questions, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about where we go from here. But General Amidror, you mentioned how the hostages have affected how the IDF has fought. And I remember very clearly when we held our webinar on October 9th, immediately after the attack, you said that you didn't think, or you thought that the IDF would fight as if the hostages weren't there, that they wouldn't impact operations. So I guess the question would be, what has changed and how have the hostages impacted IDF operations and what has unfolded over the last 6 months?
From the beginning, we understood that the hostage is a huge issue. It's one of the missions to release them. But when we went to the war, we didn't know where are they, and we didn't have any restriction based on any knowledge. From the minute that we began to collect information about where are they, it became a factor because we didn't get to those areas, we didn't bomb those areas, we restricted our forces not to go into those areas. And whenever there was a suspicious that they might be somewhere, we slowed the operation around this area. So at the beginning, we didn't have any information. So we act like they're not there. But in the minute that we had the information about location of might be hostages, that restricted our operation, and it is the same situation today.
Thanks. General Eish, you mentioned that maybe the war hasn't moved as quickly as it could have or it should have. Can you give us some insight into why that is and why, for example, the operation into Rafah has been such a long time coming? I remember distinctly hearing from you and Israeli officials in January that the war would be done in another 2 months or so. And here we are now in April, and we still haven't seen a Rafah operation. You're on mute, General.
When we talk about the time frame, maneuver warfare, we should understand that the first element to be analyzed is the fact that you can decide faster than the other side. It's not only the speed you move from one place to the other. And it seems to me that it's very much related to the previous questions. I do think that in many areas, the fact that we knew that hostages might be held under the ground or above ground in certain areas limited the way we have operated, definitely by the Air Force, and also by the ground forces. This is one element that has its own effect on the speed and how fast we were operating inside Gaza. The second element about the time it took us, I think basically after the first stage of taking Gaza, the IDF have moved to a different form of operation. It wasn't the same massive maneuver that we have seen in the first months or two, what we have seen is a clear-up phase above ground and under the ground, plus developing new capabilities in order to be able to fight under the ground. And then the third phase, which was more than so more like the things that we do in Judea and Samaria, which is all type of raids on certain areas, like we have done in Shifa and in the northern part of Gaza, and we'll see it elsewhere, like the one we did in Rafah to release hostages. Now, what is the reason behind the delay of Rafah? I'm not sure I have all the answers. It might be related to some hostages cases, and maybe it's to some other constraints. Definitely, we have to finish that part if we want to complete the mission, dismantling Hamas capabilities. Definitely, this is not only a story of 4 battalions, it's also the remnants, those who were running from the other places into Rafah, which is kind of a safe haven for them. And I think it's a part that we have to complete the sooner is the better.
Thanks. John, let me ask you if you can elaborate at all on this
If I
lack
may,
of... Yeah,
if
please
I
go
may
ahead,
add
General
one sentence, I think that here a deal or not deal about the hostages might change the whole schedule. If there is no deal, we might begin immediately next week the operation by beginning to move the people. If there is a deal, everything will be postponed. And this is a factor that it's not under our control. We are waiting to the answer of Hamas, to the American-Egyptian offer. We said almost yes, and we are waiting for Hamas to answer. And that is something which is out of the context of the war itself, but very influential on the war. And remember, we are not after 6 of war; we are after 6 months of war, because we begin the operation after 3 weeks, and we had a pause of more than a week in the middle.
Thank you, General Amador. John, I was going to ask you, given, as you talked about, this potentially historic 6 months of support and close cooperation that we had between the U.S. and Israel in this war, all of the military-to-military support that General Norkin talked about, why has it proven so difficult over these 6 months for there to be U.S.-Israeli discussions, cooperation, planning on the day after peace, on the humanitarian assistance piece, on all of these issues that you raised that go to the legitimacy question?
Oh, it's a good question. I'm not sure I have a great answer for why we haven't been able to work much closer together to get after the humanitarian issue. The fact that it was not until you had the President of the United States publicly advertising that he would threaten the potential stoppage of weapons to Israel, that suddenly within a very short amount of time, you have Israel doing things that the U.S. has been requesting for a few months in terms of opening crossings, opening Ashdod. I saw one figure that over 300 trucks came in the day after. And again, I understand Israel, the thought after the worst day in your country's history, 1,200 people slaughtered in the way that they were, thrown out of their homes into internal exile, that you somehow have to participate and be a primary actor in taking care of the enemy's civilians, a lot of whom actually celebrated the attacks of October 7th, is unthinkable. And yet that's because of the strategic factors at play on the humanitarian issue. That's why you have political leaders and people in government who have to make very difficult decisions to try and attempt to educate their people. And we have that in the United States as well, obviously. We've done a very poor job, I think, of keeping at the forefront of Americans' minds what's at stake here for the United States. What kind of conflict is our best and closest and most important ally in the Middle East facing? What it faced on October 7th? That this genocidal terrorist group exists immediately on its border, and the United States would never, ever have tolerated such a group living on our southern or northern borders. We went halfway around the world to chase a genocidal terrorist group in an attempt to destroy it in ISIS. So I just think, neither side have been exemplars of political leadership in guiding their people toward very tough decisions, but that are necessary for our strategic alliance to withstand the pressures that it's now under. I think it's true on the humanitarian. I think it's true on the day after. That very hard. Those are hard, easier to talk about than to actually get something done. But I just don't feel those discussions are happening. We're talking past each other. I think we all ought to be able to agree that a military victory over Hamas alone is not going to get the job done. That simply taking ground, conquering ground, defeating a bunch of fighters, and then withdrawing and leaving that kind of political vacuum is not a formula for trying to advance the interests ultimately of Israel, the United States, and the rest of the world community. It's a formula for some degree of anarchy and perhaps a resurgence of Hamas or even worse terrorist groups. And I know the problems are difficult, but I just have no sense that there are groups on both sides who week by week are talking through these issues, trying to understand, trying to address each other's challenges and problems to make it as easy as possible for the leaders on both sides to move forward, with the most important thing, which is sustaining and deepening this alliance and making sure that this alliance, rather than the Iranian alliance, emerges more successful and victorious in this war, because that's the real stake for America.
Thanks, John. So let me pivot to asking some forward-looking questions about where we go from here, and then I'd be happy to open it up to the audience. If you have questions, please submit them using the Q&A feature in Zoom. General Eish, maybe I could ask you about the announcement over the weekend that the IDF is withdrawing most of its forces down to one brigade left on the ground in Gaza. In particular to this point that John just made about the ability of Hamas to reconstitute itself. We saw what happened at Al-Shifa Hospital a couple of weeks ago. We're now seeing Gazans moving back into Khan Yunis and other places. What is the strategy and the operational plan behind this withdrawal, and how is the IDF going to ensure that we don't have another situation like at Al-Shifa, where hundreds of terrorists can congregate in one place and begin planning attacks and using a civilian facility for cover?
I'm not sure that the IDF is not expecting a congregation of Hamas militants again. On the contrary, the way the IDF see the last operation in Shifa in terms of intelligence and efficiency and dismantling Hamas capabilities, plus taking hostages and interrogating them, the way the IDF see it is a very effective way. However, I think we tend to focus very much on tactical aspects. We have to bear in mind that since the beginning of this war, around 65,000 Israelis living surrounding Gaza were out of their homes. And and only in the last 2 weeks, most of them went back to their villages, plus the city of Sderot. Having said that, another 15,000 are not yet back to their kibbutzim or villages. The same situation in the north. And without eliminating Hamas capabilities, with all the criticisms that you have heard from us, without eliminating Hamas as a military entity, as a threat to those villages. It means that the IDF didn't achieve its strategic goal as it was instructed by the Israeli government. And we have to remember that. Now, having said that, after 5 months, even Israeli brigades have to refresh, to go out, to maintain, sustain their capabilities and be ready for the next missions that we are going to see in different forms in the near future. When during war, it's really a wise move to take, a break, to take care of your people, your equipment, your material, to replenish, and to be ready to the next missions. And there are 2 reasons why I'm saying it. One of them is Gaza, and the second one is the readiness for other challenges like in the north. Bear in mind that there are brigades like the 7th Armored Brigade still fighting from day 1 without a break, still fighting. And the reason why I'm describing it, because the overall picture is to make sure that you are taking the right measures and preparing yourself for the future while maintaining the relevancy and the capabilities of your forces at the current time. And that's what we see right now. And the rest is going to be seen in other places in the Gaza Strip, Rafah and elsewhere.
General Amidror, you suggested that the beginnings of an operation to at least start moving civilians out of Rafah could be as early as next week. How is Israel going to accomplish that with just 1 brigade left in Gaza?
No, it's not 1 brigade left in Gaza. 1 brigade is inside Gaza, active now.
Exactly.
There is almost 2 divisions not far from Gaza preparing themselves for an operation in Gaza which will be needed. But all the time, the headquarters in Tel Aviv is taking care for being well prepared for Lebanon. And this is why they didn't want to commit all the forces into Gaza in the first place, because they have in mind that might be a need in the north. And since the operation in Damascus, we have another issue to take care for, and this is what will be the reaction of Iran, and will be a reaction, and that might get us into a situation in which we will have to involve in another kind of a war, and all that is parallel. If nothing will happen, and we don't have a deal about the hostages, and we will somehow get out of the friction with the Iranians one way or another, very short time after the end of the Ramadan, which is Friday, if I'm not mistaken, or Saturday, the IDF will begin to prepare the area for safe havens to which the IDF wants the 1 million people from Rafah to move to, and this preparation will be immediately after the end of the Ramadan. And then we have our way to convince the population to move. But for that, before that, we have to prepare the area, the safe havens. So you cannot move them without them having somewhere that they can feel that they can be secure. So that process will take, 2-3 weeks at least. And then 2 divisions are already very near to the border with Gaza. Will it be only Rafah? Will it be Rafah and the refugee camps in the center? I don't know. But it will be a big operation because we want, as it was understood here, we understand the clock of the timetable in the international community, and we want to finish it. But for that, we have to move 1 million people and then to go to the operation. The readiness, we are doing whatever is needed for maintenance and so on and so forth. So there will be high readiness for the operation. It will take some time. The time is needed. As the General I said, his brigade, the 7th Brigade, fought from day one. And it is almost 6 months, 5 months of war. You have to take them out. You have to go for maintenance, logistics, and so on and so forth. And the people themselves, they need some rest. I mean, they are in high tension for a long time. But the determination to go into Rafah is very clear in the political echelon as well as in the military echelon, and everyone is waiting now to the result of the negotiations. If it will be positive, we will pause for 6 months, 6 weeks. If not, within 3 weeks, 4 weeks, we will be in Rafah.
General Norkin, let me ask you about something that General Amidror mentioned and that you had hinted at earlier as well, which is the potential for Iranian retaliation after the strike in Damascus that killed several IRGC commanders. How is Israel preparing for that eventuality, and what sort of scenarios do you see as possible?
Well, first of all, the main issue is now to defend the state of Israel. And as we saw in the American news that some sources published that they think that the Iranians might attack Israel with cruise missiles and drones from many fronts. It's a very high challenge for the Israeli military, for the Israeli Air Force. And they should focus on the defense plans from the air and from the ground. But this is the right time for a regional cooperation, for cooperation between the American forces in the Middle East that can support Israel with, let's say, layers of defense capabilities, like the AWACS, for example. And those plans are on the table, and I think that in the next coming days or a week, the military is going to deal with the challenge of defending the state of Israel. And I think that this is the right time to cooperate like we did in the past, once they tried to penetrate to Israel from the east or from the west or from the north to south with those suicide drones. So as already been published, I think that it might be the main threat. And we can deal with those threats with the Iron Dome, David Sling, and of course with our combat fleet.
Please go ahead, General.
The problem that the General Norkin spoke about is that we really don't know. We evacuated some of our embassies around the world because they are vulnerable. And we remember the operation in Argentina against our embassy. For sure, we are taking into account the ability to launch missiles and drones and everything into Israel from Iran and through proxies, but this time probably directly from Iran, cruise missiles and so on. So we are preparing our defense in some areas because we don't know where exactly will be the reaction, but those are the most vulnerable and more clear targets that might be used by the Iranians, embassies around the world, and launching cruise missiles and drones into Israel. It will be a big test for our anti-missile systems. Of course, we tested all of them during the war. I think that I spoke in one of our meetings about it. We tested all of them during the war with very good results. If you take out the first day in which was kind of a chaos, the interception level was very, very, very good. And I hope that it will be enough to meet the threat from Iran.
General Aish, do you see a risk of escalation with Hezbollah as a result of this strike, or do you see that the Israeli strategy of deepening and expanding its strikes in Lebanon and Syria is having the desired effect of pushing Hezbollah back and trying to restore security in the north?
In order to answer it, I think it's really important to understand the strike in Syria. The one who did it struck something that the Iranians consider as a consulate, as an Iranian soil. So to that extent, it's important to emphasize it. And from that sense, you can understand why General Norkin described a very wide, I would say, readiness. I think it has a very high potential of escalation, not only because of that incident, but when you are thinking about the implications and the way that such an incident can escalate, definitely it has the potential. And it's not a secret that the first tool that the Iranians have in hand is Hezbollah. That's why they have invested so heavily in the last 15 years in Hezbollah, billions of dollars every year. They prefer proxies to fight for them instead of exposing themselves. That's basically what they do most of the time, either from Yemen, from Lebanon, from Syria, from Iraq, or from elsewhere. But they might take a new initiative. The important part of a different initiative from an Iranian soil will be expanding the war, I would say, arena and the war front, and it might escalate as I've described it. This is what I can see. And we can see already Hezbollah taking such moves so far without too much success, thanks to the high level of efficiency of the IDF, the IAF, in intercepting those capabilities with a certain price that we should emphasize, with a certain price. 17 Israeli civilians were killed in the north since the beginning of the war. Civilians. This is without mentioning another 7 Israeli soldiers.
Blaise, can I just mention that I do think there's a very important American component to the current situation, as strained as the relationship is over the events of recent weeks and the hitting of the convoy accidentally. You know, this is a really bad time in the context of the Damascus strike for Iran and its proxies to be seeing this level of stress in the U.S.-Israel relationship. It's the wrong time to be introducing any doubts into their minds about the reliability of America being prepared to do everything necessary to help Israel defend itself against any efforts by Iran and its proxies to widen the war. And even as we deal with the situation in Gaza, I do think it's important for the president and the administration, maybe they're doing this privately, I hope so, but that these messages that Iran must not overreach, don't do it. Don't take a step that you're not going to be prepared to deal with the consequences of, because America and Israel will be together if you make a wrong move here and make a major mistake. I think it's important right now for the administration to be delivering those very clear messages to the Iranians by all means that they have.
On that point, John, do you think that that message of don't, which the president publicly sent in the aftermath of October 7th, the two carrier strike groups that the U.S. sent to off the shore of Lebanon, do those still have a lasting deterrent effect, or do you think that has sort of been rubbed off in the intervening disagreements between our two governments? And similarly, we've sort of seen after Iranian-backed militia killed 3 U.S. service members at the Tower 22 base in Jordan. The subsequent U.S. retaliation seems to have stopped those attacks on U.S. troops in Iraq and Syria. You know, U.S. officials are claiming that they're seeing Houthi attacks begin to go down, they think also as a result of U.S. action. Does that give us reason to think that maybe the Iranians are going to be more careful and aren't looking to widen this conflict as well? Or do you think that the overarching optic here is that of a break between the U.S. and Israel, and that is going to drive Iranian calculus?
Well, I don't know if it's overriding, but it's now a real factor, I think, again, in Iranian calculus. We know before October 7th, it was a factor in the calculus of Iran and its proxies that there was this growing division, not only inside of Israel, amongst the Israeli public, but between the United States and Israel, these kinds of strains. Listen, deterrence is not a one-off event. The administration's made a number of very positive moves. I hope they learn from the successful implications of the retaliation for the 3 soldiers that were killed, that they responded in a far more decisive and overwhelming way than they had in the past. And what they've had now is a couple of months of pause of those kinds of Iranian attacks on our forces. But again, it's not a one-off process. You've got to sustain it. You've got to keep cultivating and tending to your deterrence over time, particularly if you've gone through a tough patch in which deterrence has eroded over time. You need to start rebuilding it, but you need to do it day after day after day, and making sure that both in terms of your messaging about deterrence as well as the capabilities you're able to bring to bear, that the enemy or the adversary is well aware of those, both your will to act if they overstep your bounds, and obviously your capabilities, which I think is not in question, that the United States has those, but it's the will issue. And if these countries see a breach or a potential breach between the United States and Israel, it can lead to all kinds of bad decision making on their part, even if they're over exaggerating what the level of those tensions are.
Thanks. So with just a couple minutes remaining, let me maybe ask all of you where you expect we'll be in another 6 months on the 1-year anniversary of the October 7th attack. Will the ground operations in Gaza be done? Will security be restored in the north? Will there be a plan for a day after, or will we still be grinding on in the same way we are now? John, I'll start with you.
My fervent hope is that we will be at a dramatically different stage in the conflict, that we will have Rafah behind us. We will have hopefully all of the hostages home one way or the other. And that Israel is then in a new phase of maintaining security in Gaza, and that the U.S.-Israel coordination, collaboration is much closer than it is today, particularly on how we move forward, both on the future of Gaza to try and begin building together with international support some kind of post-Hamas future, and that we're hopefully in the process of rebuilding or restarting the engine of the Abraham Accords to begin again moving it into new levels. I think it's a tall order. I have great fears that we'll still be in a phase of the war come October as we get closer to the U.S. elections, where this remains a real issue and the tensions in U.S.-Israel relations are up. And this becomes a major issue in an American election for president. And God forbid it becomes a decisive issue, or it's perceived as a decisive issue that an incumbent American president may have lost the support of an important constituency and lost an election because of what was happening in Gaza. I hope that's not where we're headed. And I think now is the time for us to be working through all of these differences, to really be tending to the relationship, the people who care about it, to get past these challenges and to get back on track and make sure that we're in a much better place than we are today, 6 months from now.
Thanks, John. General Norkin.
Well, first of all, we didn't mention at all the situation in the Middle East, in Jordan, and also we didn't spoke about the situation with the Muslim communities in Europe. So I think it's October 7 also affect on those areas, and we're going to see those effects in the next half a year. But to your question, I think that in 6 months, we might be behind the military activities, the main plan. And I hope that the relations with Saudi will be part of the solution. This is a very positive step, I think, for the region, for Israel, and it will take us to the right area of the strategy.
Thank you, General Norkin. General Eich, let me ask you, maybe in particular the northern arena, how do you see things there in the next 6 months?
I'll link the two arenas. I'll say that in 6 months, we have to see security restored, deterrence restored, communities back to their villages, back in the north and in the south. Rafah is only one brick in the wall that we have to dismantle. And overall, we have to see that deterrence and as it is understood in the region, restored. And I think we are on that direction. The only thing I would like to add about the North is the major lesson that we have to learn from what have happened in October 7th. We could not allow something like that in the North. And that's why I'm not so optimistic about what is going on, what is going to happen in the next, I would say, year or two with the threats over there. They have to be addressed.
Thank you, General Eich. General Amador, last thoughts from you. What do you see happening in the next 6 months, maybe particularly in Gaza?
Here, it's very much depends on the agreement or not, because as I said, an agreement will postpone everything for at least a month and a half or even 2 months. Assuming that there is no agreement, which will complicate it, and I'm for an agreement. I think that it is very essential for Israel to have an agreement to release as many hostages as possible. But let's assume that will not be an agreement. The operation in Rafah practically will begin next week with moving the people, and then the military part of it, invading the area, including Philadelphia, the border between Israel and Egypt. And we should do it very slowly and carefully because we don't want any friction with the Egyptians. The minute that the Egyptians feel that we are not pushing the Palestinians into the Sinai, they will be more than satisfied. For them, it's not an issue. as I said, there are two main issues which will have huge influence on what will happen in Gaza. The first one is the war in Lebanon. Will it happen? If it happened, when it happened? Will it be after dismantling all Hamas battalions in Gaza or afterwards? I don't know. And this is one of the big question marks. And the second one is how the conflict with the Iranians will be handled. They blame us for making the bomb in Syria, and after that they cannot be in a position in which they didn't retaliate. They have to, from their point of view. So this is the two factors that I don't know how will influence the war, but there might be a huge influence. I'm not sure, but might be a huge influence.
Well, Generals Amidror, Aish, Norkin, thank you so much for spending your late evening with us, giving us your insights. John, thank you as well for joining and your analysis. I certainly hope that your more optimistic version of what happens over the next 6 months, the release of the hostages, the end of at least the intensive fighting, the resumption of the normalization process, the restoration of security, return of Israelis to their homes. I hope we can all look forward to that over the next 6 months. But thank you for joining us. Thank you to all of you who tuned in, and have a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you
Blake.
very much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very
Have a
much.
good night.